This is the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 17. We're looking at the squads of the 2023 Gold Cup. This is the short version for Honduras' players. Here we go. It's June, and welcome back to part 2 of the media cast on the players of Honduras. And welcome anew to those who are joining just for the short version. So I'll just give a quick overview of what we did in the first part of the media cast. We compiled a list of players who were candidates for making the squad, and that was based mostly on recent participation. And then we categorized those players into their likelihood of making the squad, the definite, likely, possible, or possible but unlikely, or seems to be off the squad. So we'll be going over that list again here in part 2, and we'll be telling you who made it. And we did get a preliminary squad for Honduras. That's a 60-man preliminary squad. And we also have the 23-man final squad. So just one quick note before we begin. Honduras played 2 games since we last met. And the first one was a 1-0 loss in Venezuela. And the second one was a cancelled game against Barbados, a bit of chaos there. With the organizers in Louisiana, they were supposed to play Barbados, and Honduras actually pulled out because of the field conditions and some conditions for transportation and accommodation which hadn't been met. As I said, a bit of a mess there. And I should have said actually that the Venezuela game also took place in the USA. A lot of Central and Caribbean and even South American teams playing their games in the United States now. Okay, so here we go with Honduras, and we begin with the manager. Fabian Coito was the previous manager. It is Diego Vasquez who remains the manager that we introduced in part 1. Okay, so let's look at the goalkeepers, and from part 1 we had one definite candidate in Luis Lopez, and he did make the final squad. And then we had 2 likely candidates in Edric Menjivar and Haro Fonseca, and they also made the final squad. So things going very much as expected there. We had a couple, or just one other candidate, Marlon Licona, who seems to be off the squad. And the preliminary roster suggests that he is, because he wasn't named to that preliminary roster. Okay, for defenders, we had central defender Daniel Maldonado as a definite candidate. However, we were taken by surprise because he only made the preliminary squad. And in fact, the same is true for Carlos Melendez. However, we initially had him as a likely candidate, and then I think during the podcast or maybe before, we moved him down to possible. Anyway, we were right to be doubtful because he only made the preliminary squad there. But the player we had for likely candidate, Wesley Decas, did make the final squad. And then we had other possible candidates in Johnny Leveron and Marcelo Pereira. Those 2 only made the preliminary squad. We also had Alan Vargas, who didn't even make the preliminary squad. But the one who did actually make the final squad was Devron Garcia. So the only one of our 5 possible candidates to actually reach the Gold Cup. We had a possible but unlikely character in Getzel Montes, and he did not make the preliminary squad, nor did Kevin Alvarez, who we thought was off the team. So that seems to be the case. Of course, veteran centre-back Maynor Figueroa is retired, so his name didn't appear. So that looks pretty thin, just 2 central defenders. So it looks like players from other positions will have to will have to play out a position there. We have left backs, no definite candidates for left back, but two likely candidates. We had Franklin Flores and Omar Elvir, and both of those made the final squad. And then we had three candidates who seemed to be off the squad: Ever Alvarado, Diego Rodriguez, and Danilo Acosta. And all three of those do seem to be off the squad because they weren't named to the 60-man preliminary squad. That's a really big preliminary squad, so you're really out of the picture if you don't make that. Okay, over to right backs. We have two likely candidates, Marcelo Santos and Oscar Almendarez, and both of those made the final squad. And we also had a possible candidate, Maylor Nunez, and he also made the final squad. So our predictions were pretty good here, or really it's things went according to expectation, really. So no B team for Honduras here. We had a possible but unlikely candidate in Carlos Mejia, and he did not make even the preliminary squad. And then we had Felix Crisanto, as seemingly off the squad, as well as Wisdom Quay and Carlos Argueta, and that seems to be the case. None of those making the preliminary squad either. Over to, or moving upfield to midfield, we had one candidate coded as a versatile midfielder. I created that coding myself when I see them kind of playing in various spots. Can't pin them down to one spot. So Brian Acosta, a versatile midfielder, and we considered him a possible candidate, and he does make the 2023 Gold Cup there, selected for the final squad. For defensive midfielders, we had two definite candidates. The first one was Davy Flores, and Davy Flores did make the squad. However, our other definite candidate, Kervin Arriaga, did not make the final squad. He was just on the preliminary squad there. And the same is true for our likely candidate, Hector Castellanos, I should say. I knew something was wrong with what I was saying there. Hector Castellanos just making the preliminary squad, but not the final cut. Our possible candidate is the same, German Mejia, and he was on the preliminary squad only. And then our possible but unlikely candidate, Jack Jean-Baptiste, did not make the preliminary squad, and nor did the first of our players seemingly off the squad, Alfredo Mejia. However, the second name there, Juan Delgado, did make the preliminary squad, so we thought he was gone, but kind of in the picture roughly, but only at the preliminary squad level. And Gerson Chavez, the third player we had as listed as seemingly off the squad, does seem to be off the squad, not named to the preliminary squad. Okay, for central midfielders, we had a possible but unlikely candidate in Dennis Melendez, and he made no appearance on the roster. However, our seemingly off the squad, Edwin Rodriguez, did make the preliminary squad, but not the final cut. For left midfielders, we had a possible candidate in Jorge Alvarez, and he did make the squad. But our other possible candidate, Walter Martinez, only made the preliminary squad. All right, moving on to right midfielders. We had Kevin Lopez as a likely candidate. However, he only made the preliminary squad. The other likely candidate, Joseph Rosales, did make the final squad. And we had a possible candidate in Andy Najjar, and a bit of a story with Andy Najjar. He was named to the preliminary squad, but an article I read said that Andy Najjar declared himself injured and unavailable both for that friendly match that was cancelled and for the Gold Cup, and declared himself injured, but then played for his club, DC United, after saying that. So a bit odd there, but basically Andy Najjar pulled himself out of the tournament here. Seemingly off the squad, we had Oscar Boniek Garcia. He's 39 years old now, so aged out, so not named to the preliminary squad. And we thought Andy Najjar might be retired from international soccer, having played in none of the 3 Gold Cups since 2015. But he is still very much in the picture and has played for them. So we were wrong in thinking him retired. Okay, over to left wing, we had a likely candidate with Edwin Solano, and he did make the squad. And we also have a new candidate here, actually the only new candidate that we have that wasn't kind of on our radar, and that is Alexi Vega. So I'll tell you a little bit about Alexi Vega. He got his first cap. He got his first appearance back in October of 2022. Yes, he did, October of 2022, and then got his first cap in June 2023. So he wasn't on our radar because he hadn't played a game. He had only shown up as a substitute for 1 game. And in between those 2 games, he was not selected for the squad. Anyway, he is selected for this Gold Cup squad, and he plays for Victoria in Honduras, and is 28 years old. Okay, well, we move on to right wingers, and we had a likely candidate in Albert Ellis. Many of you might be surprised. Why would he be a likely candidate when certainly they would want him to be there? Well, that's the kind of thing we talked about in part 1. We kind of justified why we were putting them at the level we did. So just to give a taste of that, he had started 13 of their 15, had started only 3 of their 15 games since the start of 2022, and he was subbed in for 1, but not selected for another. So that's the kind of thinking we did. We kind of balanced that against the fact that we know that they would like to have Albert Ellis on the squad. So he's not missing due to non-selection, I'm sure, but due to unavailability probably. Anyway, he is on the squad, and I'm happy about that. He's an exciting player to watch. At the possible level, we had Jason Mejia, and he only made the preliminary squad. Actually, he was at the possible but unlikely level. And we had Junior Lacayo and Marvin Bernardez as seemingly off the squad, and that proves to be the case, as they were not selected even for the preliminary squad. Okay, and that is it for the midfielders. So we move on to the forwards, and for attacking midfielders, we had a possible candidate in Alexander Lopez, and he did make the squad, so he is selected. And then we had we had a player called Luis Palma, who I initially had as a possible candidate, and then after kind of looking at his information more closely, we moved him up to likely, and that was a mistake because he only made the preliminary squad. So maybe our first assessment was right on that one. The other one at the possible level was João Benavides, and he also just made the preliminary squad. Brian Moya was looking promising for Honduras for a time, but now seems to be off the squad, and indeed was not even selected for the preliminary squad. Okay, moving on to forward, and then kind of the biggest news here is Romo Kyoto, and we did report him as an injury concern in part 1, and it turns out that he is off the squad because of that injury. So we'll review that in the injury section there, but Romo Kyoto not coming to the Gold Cup. Next we had, we moved actually Choco Lozano up from possible to likely. No, we didn't. We had him as likely in the first place. Anyway, a bit of a surprise there. Choco Lozano, or Anthony Lozano, selected only for the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. And then we had a raft of possible candidates. And we'll go through the ones that actually made it first. So Jerry Bengston was possible and did make the final squad. And then Jorge Bengucci also made the final squad. And Jose Pinto made the final squad. And one of the six of them, Angel Tejada, made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. And then the other two, Brian Roches also made the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. And Clavin Zuniga did not even make the final squad. I have another name on my list here, actually, as a possible candidate, and I wonder if I just forgot to introduce it in the first podcast, and it's Rigobert Rivas at the possible level also, and he did make the preliminary squad. So we'll just add that in there and pretend that we had done that in the first place. Okay, well, given all of those possible candidates and less than half of them making it, it may be a surprise that the possible but unlikely candidate, Roman Rubilio Castillo, did make the final squad. So a bit of a surprise there. We also had a possible but unlikely forward in Ivan Lopez, and he did make the preliminary squad, but not the final cut. And then we had three players who seemed to be off the squad, and Michael Chirinos was one of them, and Jonathan Toro was another. And actually, both of those were named to the preliminary squad. And the other one, Eddie Hernandez, was not named even to the preliminary squad. And also we had Romo Kyoto as an injury, which we'll talk about a bit later. Okay, that brings us to the end of the run-through of the squad. So we're just going to finish by summarizing a little bit of this information. And we'll begin with notable non-selections. So we had central defender Danilo Maldonado as a definite candidate, but he did not make the squad. And we had central defender Carlos Melendez as a likely candidate, but he didn't make the squad. That leaves them with just two players coded as central defenders, a bit of an unnerving situation there if I was a Honduras fan. In the defensive midfield, we also have two players missing, so they won't be able to cover for the central defense. The first one is Kervin Arriaga, who we had as a definite candidate. And the second one is Hector Castellanos, who we had as a likely candidate. So I'm a bit worried about the Honduran defense as we go through this here. Right midfielder Kevin Lopez, we thought was a likely candidate, but did not make the squad. All of these players did make the preliminary squad, but not the final squad. And that's the case too with Choco Lozano, or Anthony Lozano, the forward. All right, that is the notable non-selections. And now we look at surprise inclusions. And we have Roman Rubilio Castillo making it ahead of a number of more likely forwards to be selected for the final squad. The last candidate, who I forgot to mention above, but it's a bit of a shocker really, is the return of Christian Altamirano. So Christian Altamirano last appeared, he last played for them in 2018 in May. And then in No, he actually last played for them, yes, in May 2017, I should say. And then he appeared on the bench a couple of times later in 2017, then was gone from the team. So he kind of was on our list. But lo and behold, he returned, just appearing on the bench in that friendly with Venezuela just before the tournament. And here he is on the final squad, making the final squad. So always a couple of surprises at the end. And Christian Altamirano suddenly with a ticket into the cup. Among the new players, we have Alexi Vegas, who we introduced as the left winger. And then we had about 10 players who were named to the preliminary squad who hadn't been on my radar before. I don't see much point in naming those players, but a 60-man preliminary squad is pretty big. You have to be scraping the barrel a little bit. And so, as I said during the podcast, anyone who really didn't make it to that preliminary squad seems well and truly off the team. Anyway, that is the. Hang on. We have one more section, injury updates. And really just the one injury, but it's a big one. It is Romo Kyoto. A forward, we considered him a definite candidate because he had started 10 of their 15 games up until May. And then he was out with a thigh muscle injury from mid-May, and he didn't play for his club. And he is on an unknown return date, so that injury obviously preventing him from joining the squad. Otherwise, they are injury-free, it seems, unless there's some information that hasn't been reported. And that brings us to the end of part 2 of the Players Podcast. So I hope this helps you enjoy the Cup more and gives you a bit of an insight when you watch Honduras play. And I hope to see you back in our next Player Podcast. Bye-bye.